Thank you, everybody, for being here. So this is a story, and to protect the innocent and also to avoid troubles with my marketing leadership and legal team, I'm using a made-up company name to represent the actual company that we were standing in for this account. So finance company X has a problem. They actually have 3 challenges that they're trying to solve. The first is that their team has tremendous pressure to implement a major cloud migration. They're trying to move away from their cumbersome on-premise solution. They're trying to improve their agility. They're trying to better meet their failover capabilities. And the finance department also really likes the cloud products being brought into the infrastructure also. So they're just getting started figuring out on the cloud channel when we first met them. And they're also trying to do their best to ensure resilience and good security throughout all of this. So fundamentally, they're looking to integrate their entire business. How do we simplify, get a single pane of glass into our data? How can we make sure that all of the people that we have internally are able to access all of that in a meaningful way and then be able to take action on it? Now, at the same time, for challenge number 2, they're a major financial industry, service industry provider, which is why I can't use their logo on screen. And they have major concerns about how they're going to be able to protect their business elements and their customers from fraudulent activity in particular. And because of that, as we know in this room, they're going to need an astonishing amount of very fast, very fresh data to be able to meet those expectations. And if that isn't enough for the team to consider, they were also called out by senior leadership, stating that they wanted finance company X to be able to build the future on trustless systems. So they had a big PR announcement around this, and then that kind of trickles down to their individual contributors who are like, oh, we really need to start addressing this in a big way. I'm sure that's happened for no one in this room, correct? Okay. So how can they go about actually accomplishing all 3 of these challenges? How do they migrate architectures? How do they provide exceptional fraud protection? And how do they meet what their C-level stakeholders have already agreed to? So thank you for coming to this session, Zero Trust or Bust. Bring your own cloud to real-time data. I'm Karin Landers. You've probably seen a lot of me this week. I'm with Ververica, part of the original creators of Apache Flink, and as we all know in this room, that's the de facto data streaming processing solution. So when we're talking about real-time data and being able to match the needs of companies like FCX, this is exactly what would be able to help them shine. So they reached out to us in particular about our Bring Your Own Cloud deployment option, because we can address those 3 major modern architecture challenges that they have, and then solve these 3 very seemingly different business challenges kind of in a nice package for them. So today we'll chat briefly through the importance of our real-time data streaming, how they can actually deploy out these efficient, scalable solutions, and then we're going to dive into Zero Trust and what that means for businesses, including FCX and ones like them. And then we'll relate that all together with the actual use case of how we solve this. All right, so simply put, this room's familiar. Real-time data processing, we're collecting all of this data in, we're processing and analyzing it, and then we're using it so that we can make decisions at the point that we actually need them, at the point that the data is generated or published. And it doesn't matter how they're actually able to make this decision. It could be code, person, AI. All that matters is that the data can actually get turned into instant action, particularly in their use case, their primary use case of fraudulent activity. We've got a lot of use cases that we can solve. You've heard a lot of them on stage. We're going to be spending a little bit more time on the fraud protection and security part. And something that we know is that real-time data streaming requires a couple of different elements in order to be successful. We need to be able to set up the constant continuous flow of data from any source. We also need to be able to give contextual enrichment from the historical data that already exists in the environment. And then we also need to be able to take into consideration from your data lake, your warehouse storage, or other app. Of course, most of these architectures and infrastructures have quite a few of these elements in them. And on top of that, it needs to be insanely scalable because, as we all know, data just seems to grow over time in overall volume. So in order for that data to be actionable, it needs to be fast, it needs to be fresh, it needs to be protected. Because particularly in the case of FCX, sensitive data lives everywhere, and regulatory authorities also live everywhere. So we're going to explore a little bit about how to deploy a balanced real-time streaming solution that meets those 3 specific challenges. We call this the dilemma because it seems like there's always a trade-off with real-time data. We might trade off security with efficiency or flexibility, but it's hard to get all three of these aligned together with each other. So we're going to dive really quickly through common deployment methods for streaming data platforms. Yes, of course, Ververica offers all of these. I'll keep that to a minimum, though, and then we'll take a look at why Bring Your Own Cloud in particular was one that was interesting to FCX. So first up, our traditional deployment self-managed on-premises solution. So really great for teams that have highly sensitive data that don't want to expose their environments out to outside vendors, or those that have robust on-premises infrastructure and they simply want to maintain full control, full visibility into their data at all times. Of course, with this option, you've got your infrastructure, your security, and your data compliance. You're air-gapped. Everything is kept in-house. But here comes the trade-off. We have great security, but because of this, we're losing out on the flexibility that we get with cloud models. We also are potentially missing out on that single pane of glass, as we all like and would love to have with our data points. And somebody in-house is going to be responsible for the patch, the deployment, all of the management of the system and the supporting infrastructure as well. So our trade-off, great security, less efficiency, less flexibility overall. Then we go all the way to the other side of the corner, right? Then we've got our traditional deployment of our managed service, so our cloud service. This is great for teams that want to immediately get straight into the weeds. They want to get to building, they want to deploy, they want to scale out these real-time projects, right? They don't want the complexity of creating and managing all of that underlying infrastructure that's necessary. You get production-ready Flink clusters, you can focus on the actual health or business benefits there. But as we know, with most managed solutions, you risk vendor lock-in. You might be limited to the choice of delivery on the cloud, depending on what vendor you might be using. You're trading off getting efficiency and flexibility. You're potentially trading off your security also, because you no longer hold all the keys in your own kingdom, right? Somebody else you have to expose your trust to, expose your system, your data to, in order for them to help you build this pipeline out. That brings us to deployment number 3, and this is where Bring Your Own Cloud. This is a particularly great way of taking the best of both worlds and combining them potentially into one. So we sit between the capabilities and share the benefits of our self-managed and our managed service options. So with BYOC, you get a compromise. You're not going to the full shift-left mentality of cloud, but at the same time, you don't have to manage and maintain all of that underlying hardware. You also have absolute certainty. You have SLAs, you have guaranteed uptimes, and most importantly, all full control of the data maintains in-house as well. Okay? You own the real estate that your data lives in and resides in, and because your data and the solution live entirely within your given parameter of the business or within FCX's parameter, any regulation or security rules or data sovereignty rules have to be respected implicitly. At the same time, you get that ease of that cloud-hosted solution, right? Flexible cost profiles, ability to have resilience in different cloud, preferred cloud vendors and regions, so a lot more flexibility with that. So FCX actually took a look at this, balanced it out, and said, yeah, let's give that a try. That's a deployment method that we hope can support what we're doing, but we're going to go carefully because security is our #1 concern. We want the efficiency, we want the rest of the benefits that come with that, but security has to be our top concern. Now, there's been a very strong trend that I'm sure a lot of folks have been exposed to over the last 5 years plus about how to reduce the amount of trust you actually have to expose to any given vendor over time. And it's our standpoint that the goal of a BYOC deployment should be limiting access severely, okay? While still allowing the people that actually need access to the data to be able to have it, because we need our business users to actually be able to do business. But zero trust, which we'll dive into a little bit, is becoming much less of a recommendation and much more of a must-have for businesses. So, once upon a time ago, my teenagers don't love that start of the story anymore, businesses were built like castles, right? All of our data, all of our important stuff lived inside a lovely protected known space. We had firewalls, VPNs, we were very well protected within that. Occasionally 2FA for the really up and coming among them at the time. But we'd extend our trust out to the vendors that we needed to have influence and help us build things like our streaming data pipelines. And FCX, for some parts of their business, are still absolutely using this model. The issue with this is that it's probably outdated. It is. And it's probably something that we shouldn't be necessarily using going forward. At this point, for business as a whole, connectivity is everywhere, and we all need to be connected from everywhere to everything all of the time. And connectivity has a bunch of different requirements that go along with this. So for one thing, our third-party vendors, our business-critical infrastructure, our corporate users, we don't have a physical place that we can house them and then put, security walls around them. We need to be able to do that wherever it is that they're flexibly being able to access and do work. So we're no longer waiting for FCX. They're not waiting for people to walk into a physical bank anymore. They don't want to have to close the doors if something happens. We want people to be able to do business with global connectivity over public internet at all times. Businesses are, of course, driven in a big way by cost. They want to use different hyperscalers, different SaaS cloud providers to connect across those different cloud providers because there is generically and often cost savings with that. And we don't want to rely on a singular instance. Data has to have resiliency. We know this. We need to be able to back up without interruption. We need to have fault tolerance. And we know that things are just going to happen. Breaches are a when, not really an if at this point anymore. So that mandates multiple data centers, multiplicity in our cloud architecture, and so forth. So hands up for anyone in this room who's been part of a cloud migration from on-prem over the past couple of years. Anyone? Okay, hands down if you're done with it. Okay, so again, we don't have a fixed perimeter at this point anymore. So at the same time that we're doing this wonderful thing of loosening up where we want business to happen, security breaches are also becoming more common because why wouldn't that be the two things that go together, okay? So everyone in every decision needs data. They want that data right now. Most of us have a desire when we're actually sitting in our employer to get our work done, so we also need access to that stuff to be able to do it. So we might be relying on traditional external defense parameters with a demilitarized zone that leads into a trusted zone, but that doesn't really work to protect our business data anymore. So the point here is that we don't actually have a trusted zone anymore. We can't assume that any space is actually fully safe. Instead, we need to assume a breach has already happened. We don't want to trust, we always want to verify. And this is the very basis of a zero trust principle and architecture being built. I'm not sure if this QR code works. I'm not sure that you want it because this goes to the NIST rules. So if you need some reading from Jetlag, this is a really good one to go for, okay? But simplified, I'll give you a brief overview for those that are lucky enough to not be super familiar with the NIST rules here. Our core principles are never trust, always verify. Doesn't matter if you know who the person might be or the person trying to access. Least privilege access, give people the least amount of access that they need to actually be able to get their work done. Assume a breach happens. Isolate and contain those threats as they happen, and then segment and contain. This is a good one because then if and when a breach does happen, you can actually minimize the blast radius of that, okay? So this is also all things that FCX is looking for as well. All right, I've mentioned my teenagers. Like teenagers, there are a couple key things that you have to follow in order to meet zero trust architectures. So who controls the vendor and customer relationship and the connectivity policies? That has to stay with FCX or the business in question. Owning data access and other access policies, again, FCX. Zero implementation guidelines. The business has to have full observability on all levels. They're not going to relinquish any of that to the vendor, or in this case, Ververica. And also, the business needs to be entirely in charge of their own data storage as well. So now we're coming all the way back full circle around to building the real-time data streaming platform, okay? We need the flexibility and efficiency of our beloved fully managed cloud. And then we also need the security that's much more in line with on-premises solution and meets these zero trust guidelines, because these are easier to hit when we're talking about on-prem, yeah. All right, so bring your own cloud and zero trust together. I want to put a disclaimer here. There's no single way to actually build out a BYOC offering of a streaming data platform. I'm going to share from this point out how Ververica is doing this. Please note that there's a lot of other vendors that do say that they are completing this, but what they're doing is they're giving essentially a fully managed offering, and then they're extending trust to the customer's cloud with the trust extended from that. That's not going to meet the zero trust. That's why it took us a long time in having conversations with FCX to tell them, like, no, we're doing this differently. We're holding this with you in-house, okay? All right, so let's talk a little bit about building this implementation. So we know that FCX deals with incredibly granular, sensitive data all the time. Account numbers, social security numbers, credit cards, right? Bank loan numbers. They're handling highly regulated data, of course, lots of regulation. They're also very much needing their answers fast, right? If you're building out a fraud detection pipeline, we're going to need answers with this data in the moment that we know that something might be happening there. So here's how we can implement that. Let me catch. All right, so particularly with building zero trust, we can start with a couple of questions on here. So how do we go about, let me catch up to myself here. So how do we go about doing this, especially across a globally distributed plane, which is what this is representing? So first one is actually very simple. The control plane actually stays entirely inside Ververica, but the data plane, where all the important sensitive information resides, stays entirely with FCX in their chosen cloud. And yes, they do get to choose. Ververica never sees the data. We don't touch it. They maintain full visibility at all times. We don't even know what it looks like. So when we consider who owns the metadata and the data itself, that's where, and like where we want that actually to live. What we're really trying to do here is solve a data governance problem. So in this case, Ververica owns the control panel, and we store only Ververica's metadata, while the business data stays in-house with FCX. All right. Now, in addition, all of the data processing and the data movement that's happening is also going to be happening in the cloud that belongs to FCX also. So that keeps it entirely local. That keeps it entirely under their own control, which checks the box that's required for zero trust principles. Let's go one step deeper here also. So who controls where FCX or any other business utilizing this and Ververica actually connect? This is actually happening via an agent. And that agent resides inside FCX's cloud, and it's acting as a client. And it's actually orchestrating via workspace APIs only. So the connectivity is entirely originated from FCX or from the business side. The agents maintain a secure outbound-only, egress-only connection directly to Ververica. This means that the business and FCX is in full control of their data and their connection and the agent at all times. They can apply any other security that they've already got and access requirements directly onto this agent-client relationship. So who owns and controls the data policies? FCX, right? As you recall, they also have to have full observability in order to be zero trust compliant. In a couple of slides, we'll look a little bit more at that, but this also maintains that. So essentially anything you see in gray, white, that is all owned in FCX. The cloud is this entire circle, and then we have the agent that pushes out. Okay, so one more step into zero trust least privileges principle. If you remember, there were those 4 things you have to hit. Here, Ververica built least privilege access in order to provide that real-time solution. With this, we can look at like this pyramid. It's a pyramid of trust, right? The further down the triangle, the more trust has to be extended. So it's Ververica's intention to stay at the very tip of that. As far as we're concerned, the vendor should be controlling as much as possible. We don't want access into the infrastructure. We don't want to be pulling into the rest of that container as a service or anything along that. So let's take a look at what that design looks like. I think that's my next slide. So over on the left, that's Ververica. Then, of course, over on the right is the business, so FCX itself. So we set up a simple deploy, and we manage the cloud-native microservices. So FCX is left with control of the entirety of the rest of the stack. The model that we've built is deploying microservices within an existing infrastructure. So in this case, we don't need elevated privileges in order to do that because we're using an existing Kubernetes environment here. Because we're using existing Kubernetes namespaces and so forth, we don't have access into the IaaS, we don't have access into the Kubernetes itself, and we do have an assumption that Kubernetes is there. It's there for most businesses. It was with FCX, which is why I'm showing this one out as well. So the result is we don't have to ask for any elevated privileges in order to provide this. So next up, who actually owns the observability and the other auxiliary systems that help with this? So FCX is exposing monitoring points, so they can expose like their performance monitoring, their logging, their fault tolerance, and then Ververica is able to pull and scrape those points off. But we're doing it entirely as a pool. So we're already able to integrate with any third-party observability system that's already in place, and we do that in an agnostic way. So there's a capability that's already built into the platform that they're using. In contrast, if they were to need the push of the metrics, then we would need elevated privileges in order to enact that, and that would not meet zero trust. So that's why this implementation is set up this way. So the end result is that Ververica can read, but we can't manipulate, right? We can understand what is happening, but we can't actually influence it in any meaningful way. Okay? All right. So we've talked about controlling company policies, data, observability, but this is not enough, right? One step deeper, we need to build how we're going to ensure that there's isolation when a breach happens, right? So we want to ensure that if someone gets one credential, they can't take the entire castle anymore. We all build our systems to be impenetrable. We do our best to kind of build them up this way, but we also need to be prepared for when the worst happens. And for FCX, this was the sticky point for this particular part. We want our breaches to be completely isolated, and the goal is that when they happen, the impact is entirely contained. So we can think of it more like a pop instead of like, oh, the whole business is crumbling, right? Oh, the media, the press releases that go along with a major breach at a major financial institution. So more granularity control means that a breach simply doesn't become as big of a deal. So also FCX in this case owns all of the authorization, they own all the authentication, they can isolate profiles away from one another. So people can still get their work done and log in easily, but we're not impacting with least privilege. We're not extending that out further. Let me take a look. We also firmly believe that we want security to be handled from FCX's chosen cloud provider. They're going to do it best, right? They've built their entire systems to support that. So we also, in addition, want to keep the authorization dynamic. Credentials need to refresh dynamically so that if or when an attack happens and someone actually does get in, they're not in for a very long time if they do get there. So data is valuable, right? FCX doesn't want somebody hanging out for a really long time wrecking business from the inside out. So we do have granular access control that ends up being maintained in this model. Okay, going one more layer deeper with regards to isolation. So with Ververica's IOC, each of the Flink jobs can actually be set up entirely as a completely isolated, completely granular piece of the larger business puzzle, right? So we have hundreds of jobs, but for the sake of this slide and all of our vision, I've added 2 of them here. So 2 as an example. So our fraud detection, our website login are on here. We could also do things like the high-frequency trades is a pipeline that's built. There's a reporting pipeline that's built out in that also. So how do we do this? How do we ensure that security breach isolation? So for each of these business units, in this case, each Flink job that's running on Ververica's platform, they have a separate agent, right? They have, bless you, they have separate authorization, separate authentication flow, and a separate processing environment, and also separate access to policies and storage for each tenant. You're starting to hear the pattern here. In addition, they don't share. There's no crossing the streams here. Bear with me. In addition, each tenant also has, did I jump myself ahead one? Bear with me. Nope, here we go. Each tenant also has its own agent, its own digital certificate, and its own role-based access control to actually access in. And then in addition, there's digital certificates, public TSL, transport keys that are constantly in rotation. And in order to ensure that dynamic authorization is happening, we have the credential rotations that are happening too. And to ensure granular access control, All of that access control is stored entirely on FCX's side, but the access policies are limited to API calls again, and when they're used, it limits access only into those that are actually permitted to be there. What this results in is that when a breach does happen, red. It occurs in a sort of vacuum, right? Only the isolated event needs to be explored. Only that actually needs to be researched, investigated, and remediated, while all the rest of the business can just keep on running business as usual, and the breach can't jump from job to job to job. Okay, so a little bit on the solution as a whole. So we purposefully built our BYOC deployment using Zero Trust paradigm in the architecture from the ground up. So every part of it, if you see Igor out on the floor, he's a great person to ask additional questions for this. The architecture, design, and implementation choices were made to make sure that Zero Trust was followed all the way up. So our platform is powered by the Vera engine. You heard about VeraX. That will also be potentially in here. Well, will be in here. I can't say potentially. That's supercharging the Apache Flink because it's allowing us to be able to connect, process, and analyze all of this data in the ultra-high performance streaming solution. So this solves a couple of things for FCX, right? Fault tolerant, always available, always on, tailored for seamless support of data ingestion, whether that's from source to sink, structured, semi-structured, includes Streamhouse so that we can pull up that historical data enrichment also if we need to. Also cloud native, so we're reducing the amount of our state storage in our overall operation course. So in addition, you can also interrogate your data while it's in flight, when it's happening, and then be able to run all those queries within the apps themselves. We can reference all of our data, and we can process up to billions of events per second and reduce that data processing speed also. So with this, if you want a highly performant modern streaming solution, Ververica is going to be providing that. If you want that balance of security with the efficiency, with the flexibility, the BYOC deployment was purpose-built to be able to kind of match that and give the least amount of trade-off between each of those separate components. So we're just about at time. So I'd like to end kind of where we started, which is that the challenges that FCX was able to address. If you recall, cloud migration project, BYOC, cloud. Nailed it, right? They get to choose their cloud vendor. They get to choose the region that they want. Their finance department was very happy with being able to use some of the existing discounts that they had with their preferred cloud provider also. And they do actually have Flink jobs that move between cloud and on-prem also. So there's a bunch of stuff that's happening in that. In addition, they're getting that single pane view of all of their data points and all of their data that they weren't able to get with their on-premises solution across different teams. Their multi-cloud approach that they handled also means that they have resilience within the system, better failover. And they're also getting to take a bunch of advantage of their pre-existing, I mentioned that, the cloud, guaranteed uptimes, guaranteed SLAs, and they really got right down to being able to get into production very quickly. The timeline for talking about this was longer than, well, not this, but like the timeline of talking about what they needed was less time than what actually got implemented once they were able to roll, because they were able to build and deploy with those Flink clusters that were available on demand for them, and utilizing quite a bit of the underlying infrastructure that they had for their security teams already. So now they're much more focused on their business results. They're not maintaining as much infrastructure as a result, and the team is spending their time with their application logic, real-time data transformation, and analytics. Second challenge. All right, fraud detection. This was the big use case for them. Now they're armed with highly scalable, highly performant solution, right? They got right to work building the project itself. Powered from the streaming data, request comes through, assume the middle of a Ververica part, yes, no, and off we go. So it puts Flink just so close proximity inside FCX's cloud to the data itself. It was just a much faster turnaround for them. And then finally, leadership. Thanks for publicly announcing trust less. If they're happy with trust less, I think they're going to be very happy with Zero Trust. So everybody, thank you so much for taking this journey with me today. If you've got any questions, we'll be around at lunch also. I've got some more resources. Again, my QR code's not working, but going to the ververica.com or website will answer most of that. And if you're looking for blogs, jump over to the use case. You'll be able to find a little bit more on that as well. That was with 8 seconds. I'm sorry.